state capitol. This is your Capitol Connection.
Welcome back. We turn now to our first guest, State Senator Andy Manar from the 48th District from Bunker Hill. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Springfield, Decatur, all this is in your district here. And I think you've been working pretty closely with the governor's office through his first year in office here. And just this week, you were at his press conference where he's describing the benefits of this big capital bill, $45 billion, a lot of that going to roads and bridges. There's the obvious upside of repairing roads and bridges that have fallen on hard times. But what is the impetus behind Governor Pritzker's claim that, hey, this is going to be transparent, this is going to be above board? It's obvious there's an FBI investigation going on into this right now. Why is it so important for him to make this claim that this is all going the way taxpayers want it to?
Well, I think first of all, if you look at, this is a nuance in the state budget that we rarely talk about, but if you look at spending for schools, spending for hospitals, spending for daycare, spending for health care, all of those expenditures are overly transparent at the comptroller's office. Taxpayers can see everything, literally everything. With a couple of clicks on a computer.
Down to the voucher, the check, all of it.
Contract, everything. So that's operational dollars. When it comes to capital dollars, so bricks and mortar, building roads, fixing bridges, there's a little bit of a difference. So I think what you heard from the governor on Monday is his effort, along with the comptroller, to make sure that the $45 billion, as it's spent over the next 7+ years, undoubtedly, is as transparent as state government is today. That nothing.
Does the law need to change to make that happen?
No, it doesn't really. I mean, it could, but I think that shows leadership on the governor's part and the comptroller's part for just taking that step early on before a dollar has been spent from that bill. They are setting this up, and I think that's always, to me, transparency is always a step in the right direction.
So you're saying we will see every contract, we will see every dollar spent, and that will be handled through the comptroller's office or the Capital Development Board?
I mean, depending on the agency, yes. But what I've heard from the governor personally, and what I heard from him on Monday standing out in front of the IDOT building, is that this is going to be a transparent process from beginning to end.
Where it began is interesting, though, because as the discussions for the capital bill started, that really began on the campaign trail in earnest for Governor Pritzker as he made some of these promises, and then they started to become law, and all of that picked up and churned. You yourself were traveling with Senator Sandoval across the state, holding these open hearings and trying to convince and persuade the public of the upside of all this. In your travels and in your meetings with Senator Sandoval, did you ever see anything that you thought was suspicious or that raised alarm bells?
No, our meetings were public. I think we held, this was last year, but I think we held 6 or 7 around the state. The idea, and it was overly bipartisan, it was attended by both parties in the Senate, which was reflective in the final bill that was approved and signed by the governor. Our hearings were joint hearings between the Appropriations Committee, which I chair in the Senate, and the Transportation Committee, which Senator Sandoval chairs in the Senate.
Chaired.
Chairs, thank you. So we did that together, and the idea was to get local input on what could potentially be in a bill. Keep in mind, this was before there was actually a bill filed, before either revenue or spending. Before the governor had actually put a solid proposal on the table, which he did. But all of that work took place before the legislative process here in this building actually started to take root.
Right, and I don't know exactly what to make of this, but if you talk to Democrats and even some Republicans privately, I don't know how many of them would dare say it on the record, but many of them say they weren't entirely that surprised that the FBI raided Senator Sandoval's office. What was your reaction when that happened?
Well, I don't, I mean, to be honest, Mark, I don't spend a whole lot of time on things like that. My role here is to do my job for the 48th District, just like it was in those hearings when I did sit next to him. And, we took our turns with the Republicans getting input from local people. That's what I focus on. I think it's important also that he voluntarily stepped down from that chairmanship position, which I encouraged publicly.
After a few weeks of pressure.
Sure, and I released a statement early on that said, I think given the specific nature of what we knew at the time of the investigation, which was disclosed in public documents, and the position that he holds as the chairman of that committee, it would be best for him to voluntarily step aside. I'm glad that he did. There's still much, I think, to be uncovered and unpacked. There's probably much more happening behind the scenes than you or I or anybody in the state knows, frankly. Everyone is innocent until proven guilty. I'm pleased, though, that my colleague voluntarily, on his own, stepped aside from that chairmanship position.
What does all of that scrutiny and all of this speculation, what kind of cloud does that create that could hover over the Senate as we head into veto session? All the lawmakers coming back here for the first time since this investigation was made public. Does that complicate efforts in any way?
No, it doesn't.
Why not?
It doesn't, because this bill was highly negotiated. There wasn't a single moment, I could tell you, where a piece of this bill, even the smallest piece, wasn't negotiated with both the House and the Senate, Democrats and Republicans. And that was reflected in a very, very big bipartisan majority supporting this bill for good measure. So I am confident that the Pritzker administration moving forward, as was publicly promised by the governor on Monday, standing with Democrat and Republican lawmakers from around the state, that his administration is going to handle this exactly as they should.
And the governor has other agenda items, other things that he's focused on during this fall veto session. One that he's already publicly advocated is consolidating the local police and fire pension funds into two columns, the Downstate and Suburban Police Fund and the Downstate and Suburban Fire Fund. Where do you stand on that idea today?
Yeah, I support the concept. We're all waiting to see a bill. I think we're going to see that most likely either today or tomorrow. But to me, it makes sense from so many regards to take hundreds of funds that are individually managed, put their kind of buying power together for investment, and then pool that to increase returns for those funds to help the people that they're intended to help. There's a little bit of controversy, of course, associated with management of those funds because the local aspect is partially taken away, not completely, but partially. But in this day that we're in today in state government, I can't find a credible reason to have 800 plus, which I believe is the number.
650 plus, yeah.
Thank you. Separate funds operating separately, independently. I think the governor's put forward a proposal. We're obviously going to have our chance to influence that proposal starting next Monday when veto session begins.
I want to get your response to House Republican Dan Calkins, who also represents Decatur and some of the surrounding area. He said recently that right now he does not support Governor Pritzker's proposal because it doesn't go nearly far enough.
Yeah.
He said he wants to see a constitutional amendment that would allow the voters to weigh in on the COLA, the annual increase that's baked into the pension system right now. He wants to open up the pension protection in the Constitution, and he says that this consolidation just nibbles around the margins. I'm paraphrasing him, but that's the message of what he said. Your reaction to it?
So Vince DiMuzio was a state senator in this building for 30 years. He was a mentor of mine, and I would always hear him tell new lawmakers that they should make their decision and their vote on the bill in front of them, not the bill that they wish was in front of them. So I don't, if the representative or anybody else wants to pursue that issue, let them pursue it. But that's regardless of the question about pension consolidation. So this excuse that we're not going to support something because, yeah, we like it, but it doesn't go far enough, that's a real convenient place to be. I would urge everyone, both sides of the aisle, House and the Senate, to focus on the proposal that's going to be before us next week.
And should the legislature put on the ballot in 2020, there's still plenty of time to do that, a question about the pension protection clause, because the Supreme Court has used what is in the Constitution now to say you cannot diminish a pension benefit. The only way that changes is if the voters and the legislature put that question on the ballot and voters say, you know what, maybe we should rethink Illinois' pension protection clause, which is among the strongest, if not the strongest in the nation.
In the country, and has been reaffirmed a couple times by the Supreme Court. No, I'm opposed to that, and I'll tell you why. I represent more public service employees in the state Senate than I think anyone in the legislature. And there was a promise made to those individuals, and we have to keep that promise. And any changes have to be constitutional in measure. But the extraordinary step of amending the state constitution at this moment in time, I oppose. We made a promise to those individuals who worked their careers for state government. It wasn't their fault that legislatures and governors decades ago, before I got here, while they were working, chose to do different things with that money. So I believe we have to uphold that promise to those individuals that paid into the funds.
As Illinoisans are entering retirement years, they often see more frequently occurring and recurring medical bills come across the mailbox, land on their kitchen table, and increasingly those costs take more and more out of their paycheck, out of their retirement check, whatever that may be. You've also laid out a plan. Do you plan to try to pass this during veto session, your plan to cap the cost of insulin for your out-of-pocket expenses through your insurance company? Is that something you want to happen in the next 3 weeks?
It is, and we're hoping to call the bill for a vote in a Senate committee on Monday of next week, maybe Tuesday, but likely Monday. That would be the first real public debate that we have had on the bill, which I filed late in the legislative session, and we've spent all summer negotiating this bill. Look, people that I represent are getting soaked because of costs of pharmaceuticals, not just diabetics. Everyone is getting soaked because the prices of prescription medication are going through the roof, and something has to be done. This is a small step that addresses a very narrow but important window of individuals that have to have this medication to stay alive,
but
literally.
And it's narrow because it's insulin, but
right.
It's also narrow because it's not everyone.
No, it's not
everyone
everyone.
That is diabetic. Can you explain why?
Yeah, so state government is limited on what we can regulate. Federal law supersedes state law. This bill is everything that we can do to regulate the cost of insulin. There's going to be some insurance plans that aren't covered by this bill, which we've acknowledged up front and along the way.
And for people watching at home, if they're looking, how do I know my insurance plan is going to be capped, or will it not be capped? Yeah. Who does this affect? Generally,
if it's an employer-covered insurance plan, the state government cannot regulate that. So this would help thousands of people.
We're talking Medicaid, we're talking Medicare,
or some other public plans. Yes. So keep in mind, this will still help thousands of people, but we can only do what we're allowed to do, and this bill does everything that we're allowed to do in state government.
Because it's just insulin, I wonder, is this and not to diminish the impact to the people that are already on insulin, it would make a real impact to them right away, but is this also a trial balloon to take a larger stab at all pharmaceuticals down the road? If this works, could that be a template for future legislation?
Well, this is step number 2. So step number 1 was a bill that was passed with big bipartisan numbers that Governor Pritzker signed into law to establish the first regulations on pharmacy benefit managers, PBMs in Illinois. Insulin bill is a continuation of that process. Ultimately, clearly, something has to be done about the cost of pharmaceuticals, out-of-pocket costs for insured individuals. My father spends $1,000 a month, Mark, on pharmaceuticals. He's a diabetic. $1,000 a month, retired, worked his whole life. $1,000 a month on Social Security. That's what my father spends. That can be replicated for millions of people in the state of Illinois. So I'm hoping to get this bill across the finish line, hoping to have the governor sign it. He's expressed his support for it. And then we have to put our heads together and figure out how do we get our hands around the soaking of families in Illinois when it comes to prescription medication.
And the federal government will have, I think, much more to say, or could have much more to say about this than individual state governments could possibly muster up together.
Yes.
You may have seen the mayor, also during veto session, the mayor of Chicago has made several big requests, big asks of the state legislature as the city grapples with its own budget hole, nearing $1 billion a year, a deficit there. She's looking for a number of different things, like a city-owned casino or some different taxes that they could have there. But she's pointing the finger at Springfield and saying, we need help there. How far are you willing to go to help the city of Chicago with its budget problems, as the mayor there has requested?
Well, I would tell you that I only know what I've read in the newspaper and conversations that I've had with my colleagues from the city and our caucus. I've had no outreach from the city in terms of what their priorities are that would require action by the General Assembly. So going into next week,
that they're not doing their job to lobby properly?
Well, I'm saying I've had zero conversations with the
considering the
city
veto
of Chicago.
session is upon us, isn't that a little bit late?
Yeah, I mean, keep in mind too, there's been a transition change at the city. There's been a transition in state government too. So I'm not saying laying this squarely at the city's feet. There's been a lot of change, but we have veto session upon us in a matter of a few days now. I've had zero conversations with anyone from the city saying, hey, we would like you to consider these things that would require a change in law in order to help the city of Chicago alleviate budget pressures. I would also tell you that there's a lot of attention paid to the city of Chicago because of its size in the state, and it is an economic engine.
It's a quarter of the population.
Absolutely. But that doesn't mean that budget challenges here in Springfield or in Decatur or in Bunker Hill or in Gillespie are any less important. Maybe those things don't require swift legislative action, but they are equally as important to the people that live in those communities.
Interesting. The mayor is grappling there with the teacher strike that has been ongoing, and there's a couple other teacher strikes or teacher aid strikes that are sort of forming and cropping up in smaller localities around the state. There have been some conservatives who have piled on here and said, hang on, there was other states nearby where teachers and just like police officers and firefighters are not allowed to strike. What's your position there? Should teachers be allowed to strike?
It's comical to me that anyone would even suggest that we return to a day when a public school teacher, under extraordinary circumstances, I would say, extraordinary, which is the law today, teachers just can't go out on strike. There are things that have to be done before that's even possible in the law. So the idea that we would somehow just remove the ability of a worker, a public school teacher, who I guarantee the ones that I represent are underpaid, can't strike is just ridiculous to me.
All right. Well, there you have it. A decent preview of what we might expect to happen during the veto session. Senator Manar, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
When we come back, the Director of the Department of Agriculture, John Sullivan, looks back on what was a disastrous planting season, how the harvest turned out, and what's the prospect for trade in China. That's next.